All right, you good to go?
I'm good to go.
Time's ready. All right, cool.
All right, this panel is going to be done standing up. All right. So, welcome to what's the name again I gave for this panel? From pony fan work to the industry. So, I had lots of people ask me a lot of questions when they heard that I was working in the animation industry, and I thought, okay, let's do a panel to actually cover all of those things to try to just, there's some myths and there's some, just the misconceptions that a lot of people have. Let's try to clarify the whole thing and let's try to make it more funny. So, hand raised, like, who here considers working in the animation industry or just is on the path to go there? Okay. Now let's see if at the end of the panel more hands are going to be raised or more hands are going to be lowered. Or maybe we're going to get the same but be spread differently. So, let's go with the introductions because let's start from the beginning, okay? I'm just going to show, for people who are not the most knowledgeable about my content, so let's just let's see if I can even do that properly. Oh, I don't have the sound. Let's see if I have the sound. Actually, you know what? I don't care about sound. So I've been. Do you see my? So I've been doing 2D and 3D animation in the fandom back in the days. I started a long time ago, and I was really interested in actually pursuing that as a career. So, and you can see a bit what the kind of things I used to do in the fandom, and I'm still doing. I'm actually going to be able to show more at the future panel. Well, future panel at this con. So. Switch back to the view. So let's start from the beginning. What am I? Oh, it's probably another. Never. So from the beginning. So I was born in January 1993. Nothing really happened of note for about 20 years, except a little thing in the middle where I was introduced to the whole idea of computing. At the very early age. My dad was a programmer, so he had access to the internet very early. Big mistake. You don't want kids to have that much access to the internet. So I discovered Adobe Flash back when it was known as Macromedia Flash. My dad had a thick book like this that was basically just Flash for web development, but it came with a copy of Flash. And I thought, hey, I've seen some people online use Flash to do cartoons. And by cartoons, I mostly just mean Mario just fighting stuff, because that was the coolest thing for someone who was about that tall and was very, very easy to impress. So, about 20 years after my birth, there's this little event called TrotCon 2013. I decided, okay, let's take all the skills I have with Flash. Let's try to do a little thing, since My Little Pony is animated in Flash. Let's try to do something that's interesting out of it and show it to people. And I get very, very, very inspired to do that kind of thing in just as a career. So, time to join an animation school, right? Right? Well, okay. So a lot of people, when they think of animation school and what to join, one of the answers that a lot of people are going to say, well, what about CalArts? Like, there's a lot of people who went there, like Laurent Faust, and you're going to say, like, why would you do that? And there's a lot of reasons why to go, and there's a lot of reasons why not to go. None of that! Those pictures, like those memes, they're not based on truth, they're based on misconceptions. A lot of it is basically just trying to force some kind of pattern on some things. And yeah, the person who came up with the term Cal art style should go to prison. For other things, that's completely unrelated. Like the reason why it's saying like don't go to Cal Arts is not because it's bad or anything. It's just that there's a geographical reason why you might not want to go to Cal Arts. Like it's far away. Like why would you go travel that much to go to a school? While and was looking at a list of just all the schools in the United States that taught animation. There's two in Ohio, and here's the thing: Ohio barely exists, and we have two schools. So if you want to go to a school, it should be fine. You're just gonna think, well, all those schools which one I've been to? None of these. I went to Centre Renard, which is basically an animation and design school in Montreal. That used to be there in Parc Extension, a very weird building that looked like this from the inside. Keep that picture in mind, it's going to come back later. And the whole idea with school, the whole reason why I tell people like it's not the school that matters, it's what you learn from it, is that when you go with that kind of school, they're actually going to look at your demo reel, and they're not actually going to care that much about the school you select. The only time I've had an interview at a job and I was told like, what school did you go to? It was mostly just curiosity, like think, hey, I've been there, or hey, I've known someone who's been there. They don't care that much about the school itself because it's more the things that you learn from it. And the whole joke about this is that, it doesn't matter that much. The job you're going to do at the end is still, it's still going to be fixing our bits. And as I say, like the school choice doesn't matter, only what you learn from it. For example, that's one of the shots I did for our student film that we had at the very end of the year. And basically I was asked like, can you make a shot for a giant city and use all your skills? And one of those things is that I've done that shot and now I can actually show that shot to other studios to show like, here's the thing I've made. And one of the ideas that you can either compile a portfolio or a demo reel, where you could just assemble all the things that you've done in the past and you just show like, this is the kind of things I can do. For demo reels, like 6 pillars of the things you could, 6 pillars of the things that just make the demo reel better. For example, make it short. Like you don't want to give 10 minutes worth of kind of things to a studio to just have to go through. Like if you can show within a minute you're really good at the kind of things you can do, you don't need to do it in 10 minutes. So no fluff, one of the things, for example, that I was always told about when it comes to demo reels, like don't try to make the edits like sync up to the music. Don't try to add effects on top that try to just make like cool transitions between the shot. Like people want to see the raw stuff you've made, no fancy things added on top just to try to make it more punchy. Although, well, if it's special effects, that's a different thing. Like this is the punchy things you add on top. Start strong, like you have your best shots first, because some people might think like, let's start with the first things I've done and just show the progression just to make it clear I've got how much I'm getting better. Like don't do that, like start strong, just get the best first impression, and sometimes you're gonna get you're just gonna go with, you might have some weaker stuff but show more variety of skills that might be more important. And I say that, but like if you have different studios that require different things, like you can customize your demo reel for the needs of that studio. You can just make a custom build of that reel and that's it. When I was saying also no fluff, like don't worry about the music. They're not even going to listen to music. So you can put whatever you want as long as it's not offensive, and it should be fine. In my case, I put some pony music on my stuff because I didn't have any idea what to go with. So for the show your skills, which one was? Oh yeah, I wrote that one specifically weird. So, for example, think of it like, in this case, it's less about if you already work on student films and more like if you work in the industry. Like think of a shot where you have a very, very, that very popular shot of a movie that's really, really popular because, I don't know, people made lots of jokes about it or it's very iconic. But the kind of shot that you show, the kind of things that you've actually done is not very impressive. Like it's not going to be very impressive for people to think, well, you made something popular, but what can you do? Like if it's just a character just standing there and that's it, they're not going to be very impressed. they show your skills. Like, don't take just a shot from a movie you've worked on, but you didn't work too much on that shot just because it's the cool one. And to show your skill, like, explain to people like what did you do in that. One of the things I was always told that's a very effective way if you don't have like a behind the scene that you can show is take the clip and just explain the bottom what you did. So for example, I'd have a shot from a movie and let's say like I worked in the environments, I worked matching live action photography, I worked on that element, and just explaining to people what you did is great. Like they're not it's not a vacuum. So you might have like at an interview, they're going to look at the reel and they're going to ask like, what did you do? And then you can explain your process. Like I've worked on modeling those buildings, scattering them around for a city just to make it feel like a real thing. And that kind of real, like you can put pony as a real, like animation studios, they know our nerds, they know that we have very specific interests. Like it's not the fact that there's ponies that should scare them away. It's mostly just the idea that you don't want to show that you're obsessed. You just want to show that you have varying skills, and if there's ponies, like it shouldn't matter as long as it's well made. So you do all of that, and you probably get hired at a studio, and it's not that kind of experience at a studio. Kind of. Remember those pipes? For some reason, they don't like the idea of finishing a ceiling like we have here. They just go with, and that one is at current studio. They just go with some pipes. And sometimes they try to make it feel a bit more special to put some lights, but you can clearly see that it's not going to hide anything of the pipes. And that's my studio right now. And when it comes to studios, like I'm taking like, you're probably going to have some studios that you really like. And don't only apply for Disney. One thing that I recommend to a lot of people, like, because the whole idea is that I've heard some stories of people hearing like they were offered a job that was pretty interesting, but they found out that the project was not too interesting for them, even though that could have been so good in terms of the kind of skills that they would have learned and the kind of things that they could have shown. And just the idea of just refusing a thing because it's not as popular it's not going to help a lot. Just the idea, for example, and this one is from personal experience. I'm mostly saying that because I applied to work on My Little Pony, and they said no. And when I received the email, I felt really devastated. It's thinking like, I'm better than that, right? I'd like to actually work on a show, but and then I just realized it was just dawned on me I kind of live on the other side of the country, so just the idea of working for them would have been quite a nightmare. And sometimes you might have some skills that might be helpful, but you might not have the very specific skills that they need. For example, it was a mostly 3D show, so my 2D skills that I had on top of it might not have been the most effective for that. So, it's one of the realizations that sometimes when you work at a studio, you might not be the person that they need. And that's okay. I can still enjoy the show even though I didn't work in it, and that's fair. I say don't work for Disney, but you might still work for Disney if you don't work for Disney, and that's life. Because you're going to have some studios that are going to subcontract other studios to make the movie for them. It might give mixed results. Sometimes you're going to see studios that are not the most suited, and sometimes you're not even going to notice because they did such a job that you didn't even realize it's done by a different studio. I remember when Boulder decided to do some Equestria Girls shorts, and some people didn't even realize it. I did because they did change a bit their approach to compositing, but that's it. And that means that you have lots of opportunity to work for different studios, even if you work as a different studio. So the best example I can give with that is, it's not technically Disney, but let's just ask for VFX companies that just work on Aquaman, the movie from 2018. Do you want to give some names? Good, because actually it's kind of a trick thing. It's not 8 companies that work on that. Like I was thinking, like, what kind of game show thing could I get that have lots of answers? And then I was thinking, like, okay, there are probably 8 to 10 special effects studio, right? And then I actually looked at the credits and just looked at the whole list. And you're going to think, why would you hire that many studios? And a lot of those, they have very specific things that they're very good at. So you want to actually show, for example, you're going to have some studios really, really good at creatures. And some of them, what they do instead of just, for example, whenever you have a movie that's released in 3D, they only do the 3D post conversion. So you have lots of artists just cutting actors, just to have the depth effect working. And you're going to see underneath there's a company called the Third Floor. I'll give you some more explanation related to that for that one. But yeah, I'm mentioning Aquaman because that's technically my first job. Well, I say first job. I did have something before that didn't turn out to work well. We did 3 months and I realized I was not suited for it, and that's life. Sometimes you realize that something you thought you'd be effective at in the studio that you're not good at. It's not really a reason to give up. It's just that you have to reconsider what you're good at. In this specific case, what I did as a return, like, let's go and so what I did is that I applied for MPC, that they needed some environment artists, and I thought, well, I got some environment art with that whole shot of the city that I could actually show, and I thought, like, let's go, let's apply, and eventually they did a little bit of training just to know a bit their pipeline, which I'll cover a bit later, and I thought, okay, let's see what they have as projects, and the first project they told me was Aquaman, and I thought at the time, okay, I don't specifically like Aquaman, but that sounds like an interesting project. And that was really interesting because we had to do a whole environment for a sequence that would last less than a minute, but we had to do something massive with we had to match the live action photography we had as a reference, and just try to make something incredible out of what we had. It was quite the experience. I learned a lot. And then right after we went with Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, where we had some live action sets that we actually had to match with all the 3D models that we had. A lot of it was static extension. We had some problem solving to do to actually get the environments to match with everything else. So lots of crazy things that I've learned. My favorite thing was we had a scene where one of the characters hit a banner, and the whole idea was some kind of banner, colorful banners held by a pillar. And the whole idea is that the character hit it and made it collapse. So I already made a model of it just standing up for all the wide shots because we would need to match those. And then I was asked, like, you're gonna need, since the character hit it, you're gonna need to make a model of it collapse on the floor to make it match for the next scenes. And one of the things I realized, I was looking at all the scenes for the rest of the movie, I just pointed out to my supervisor, like, we don't have any scene where we see it. And we saved a lot of time not having to actually work on that element just because we realized that we didn't have to do those things. And so that's one of those things I really recommend. Good communication with that kind of studio does an incredible job. That's why I learned so much from that first job. And that's why I say, like, I learned so much from my first year compared to the 3 years I did at school, just because I actually had proper hands-on experience with actual industry standard pipelines. Because schools might have stuff that is close, but it's not the kind of pipeline experience you have from work. And you look at this and you think, like, those are some of the sets that are worked on, just trying to model all of those and try to render that on the hardware we had. Like, studios might have some incredible hardware for rendering those plates, but it's still computers. You still have all the limitations of trying to make it work, the limitations. And we managed to make it work, and I learned a lot. And I'm very grateful because that experience actually translated back to my pony work. I actually got to learn how to make those sets again, but with a more limited budget that I had as a creator. And I also learned a lot about how to destroy those massive elements because of Aquaman, because we learned how to make models that would actually collapse like actual buildings. So it was incredible. And I learned a bit more how to make big cities with lots and lots of details, like in Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, that I could actually apply to my Ponyville model. So that part was mostly just how the live action VFX pipeline that I've learned. And how it translated to actually pony work, but it actually went back to actually working on my fourth job. I'll explain later why I say second and fourth. The whole idea is that I ended up working in an animation studio during COVID because during COVID there was not a lot of opportunities for people to actually work on live action movies. So the animation industry actually had some kind of boom, and I got there like right there. And I was really at first I was kind of disappointed, but I heard, okay, you're gonna work in a Scooby-Doo movie, and I thought, and like I didn't specifically care about Scooby-Doo, but the experience I had just working in it, which is quite a shame because I can't even show the work, but the experience I had just learning all the things with my team was incredible. It's something that I value a lot. I also worked a bit on Supergiant Robot Brothers, so I learned a lot about Unreal Engine. And personally, I don't specifically use Unreal Engine, but I learned a lot of skills that actually translate back to 3 and more under NDA. So the whole thing is that for a while they were running out of projects, so I had to move to a different studio because unfortunately the contract nature of working with animation studios is that you're probably, if you're a starter, probably going to have to jump from studio to studio to try to find employment. So yeah, my third job that was right in the middle while I was waiting for more projects. All of it is under NDA, and I'm very disappointed that because of that I can't really talk about it. So I can't really talk about the things about that's under NDA, but I can talk about NDAs, right? So it's pretty straightforward. Non-disclosure agreement. None for no, disclosure for disclosing, and agreement for you signed it. You'll sign NDAs, lots of NDAs. If you breach NDAs, you'll get blacklisted and possibly go to prison. You're going to think, well, what kind of thing could I breach in terms of NDAs? You're going to think like, because one of the things is, for example, if you're working on a project, and one of the examples I've heard a lot is if you try to get more work and you're going to be tempted to say like, here's what I'm currently working at, and you're going to show it to a different studio to try to get more work. But if you do that, you're signifying to another studio, oh yeah, I can't be trusted with NDAs because I breached the NDA that I had with my current studio, even though I think you're cooler. And just signifying to other studios that you're not trustworthy is a big red flag. And of course, you could go to prison. There's not a lot of situations where breaching that kind of NDA for the animation industry actually went that far, but you don't want to be the first, and you don't want to cause too much trouble. Main element, for example, the things that can be covered under NDA, like plot points. Main thing is, for example, think of, for example, Endgame when Infinity War, before it came out, people were talking about all the theories about it, and you're thinking like, if someone who worked on VFX just went to the press and basically said like, here's all of the plot details of the movie, for a movie that cost like $300 to $400 million and just spoiled every single detail, how much it would hurt the box office of that movie, because they rely on the fact that it's going to need to make at least $1 billion just to break even. You have lots of elements that you need to sign on because it's that important. You want to make sure that you don't ruin a movie before it gets released. And of course, once it gets released and people already know about it, like, you wait for a couple of weeks before actually talking about the plot points, which is kind of a rule that everybody else has. You don't want to spoil the movie for people who haven't seen it. That's kind of seen as a jerk if you don't want it. Working on it, some studios, what they have, unfortunately, some studios, they have a contract with the actual studio that makes the movie. For example, if you're doing special effects work for a movie, you can't just announce that you're working on a movie if that studio didn't announce it. You might get in trouble. I've seen some people having to basically losing their job just because they announced it too early. You can't really disclose some of the technology. Sometimes you're going to have some very proprietary technology made by your studio that you can disclose. You can't really leak code because that's very important. That's industry secrets. Celebrities, for example, if you say like, I'm working on a movie that has this actor, and you're really excited because that's like your favorite actor ever. Some people might just think, oh, so that movie, and then they just trace back and they realize, oh, so you work on that one. And sometimes that celebrity was not announced, so it could be the opposite problem, but you don't want to disclose that. Images, for example, you can just take a photo of your computer screen and say like, I'm working on this, because some people are going to just zoom in and try to find all the hidden clues. We're all guilty of that whenever we see a picture that someone famous posts about a movie they're working on. We're trying to just individually look at every single pixel to try to find the clues. Like that's our curious nature, but you don't want to risk that by posting pictures in that kind of studio. Like I was looking when I was just checking the pictures just of the ceiling, I was thinking like, hey, I hope we don't see anything interesting in the reflections. I remember back when I was on Aquaman, I had an older phone. I was thinking like with security, I don't want to have any issues. So whenever I had my phone on, for example, I was just listening to music, I had to just line up the camera in a way where it wouldn't look at the screen. And I was thinking like, okay, put this here. Okay, doesn't work. Okay, safe. And I was thinking, oh, I hope the microphone doesn't pick up my conversations, even though like it's not NSA kind of stuff. But you want to avoid having that issue. So yeah, security policies, like you, for example, you can't, you're gonna have some companies that are gonna ask like, you're gonna need 2FA for that kind of thing. If you work from home, you can't leave your computer just logged in while you're away, because someone might just sneak in. Like for example, I don't know, you have a roommate, a partner, or anybody who could just come here and just find, oh, you're working that movie, it's exciting, I'm going to talk about it to all my friends. And when I'm thinking of NDAs, like how, you don't want to breach those NDAs. Sometimes you might have to lie about not knowing about that thing. It's pretty tricky, but you basically have to just avoid talking about the thing you're working on, because that's the kind of tricky things that, and sometimes it's tricky because sometimes you learn about things about a franchise before other people, but sometimes you don't know about that those things are supposed to be secret. So you're thinking like, oh, I can't say that thing because it's, I don't know, this a thing that should be, it should be common knowledge for the people after they've seen the movie, but in the production, like it's, like for example, whenever you're working in a franchise, sometimes you're not even going to work on a franchise, you're just going to work on something that's completely new. But you have to know if people even know that it exists, for example, with original properties. So you need to be very, very careful about the kind of things that you're allowed to disclose. So that's why a lot of people don't want to talk about it at all. Which is why I'm going to go to the next point. Do not try to push artists to breach their NDAs. Like whenever you have artists at conventions, that, for example, people work in the show, like don't try to ask them like tricky questions about weird characters that might show up, because that kind of thing can be very dangerous, because they might actually breach your NDA by saying something that shouldn't be said. Sometimes they're going to try to trick them, sometimes. And the whole thing is that it's going to get them in trouble, it's going to get us in trouble, because if, for example, it gets the whole studio they're working on, like if it gets Atomic Cartoons in trouble for their work, and they lose a contract, and then Hasbro realizes like, we lost our animation studio, but it's not worth finding another one, and they just cancel the whole series. Like you don't want that to happen. So it's about the NDAs for the kind of things you work on, but what kind of job do you get if you want to work in animation but you're not really an animator? Because some people are not as good at drawing characters, some people are not as good at actually having characters emote with their bodies. Like it's not everybody who do that, and you're gonna have some jobs, for example, and here's a couple. Like it's not the full list, there's a lot more jobs that are involved in studios. There's a storyboard artist, and the whole idea with that is with storyboard artists, you're going to think, what do I need to be very good at drawing? And it's good to be able to give drawings that are good at communicating what you're doing, but it's not about the actual quality of the drawings. It's more about the quality of the storytelling that's done with the visuals. So for example, if you're going to have characters that have a conversation between each other and you want another character to just jump in, how are you going to communicate it? And like the lazy way that you're going to see a couple of productions do if they don't have the time to storyboard it is that you're just going to have a character just staring at one side of the screen at a very specific angle, and then it cuts to the other character staring from the other side, and that's it. And it cuts back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and that's really boring. And for the animation industry, like we have so many possibilities of ways to make characters interact. So being a storyboard artist is really helpful for the production, just to be able to actually find ways to make it more interesting visually in terms of storytelling. What kind of events? How do you pull off those emotions? For example, just doing the storyboarding for a fight scene, for example, all the kind of ways you make it exciting by the way that you use close-up shots or just the assembly of movement. Knowing continuity of movement from left to right, knowing how to actually make it work, and how to actually make it work with the budget, because sometimes you're going to be told like we can't just cut back and forth between so many angles at once. We need to communicate the whole action with a single camera angle, and sometimes you're going to have those restrictions. Sometimes you're going to have characters that are not made to be animated in some way. So for example, if you have a character that's like this tall and needs to grab something, like how do you make it in a way where it's not going to disturb the flow, or you're not going to have to animate the character just grabbing a chair, stepping on it, and doing all sorts of movements that are going to kill your animation budget. Like you have to consider a lot of elements, and of course working with a script to actually have the whole script working. And of course, if you have a good storyboard, you also need to get good layout artists. So the whole idea, remember when I was talking earlier about the third floor? It's a company that does nothing but that. It's Previous. The whole idea with that is that you basically take models, and sometimes they're going to have fancier models for the movie. Sometimes they're going to have like really, really bad models that just kind of look like a character. And the whole idea with that is that you want to give a very rough idea of how the character scenes are going to be done. So for example, you just look at the characters, how they're going to place in the frame, the lens used, the angle chosen, and just to have a good idea of what kind of movement they're going to be allowed to do. So the kind of animation you're going to do, it doesn't need to be very good, it needs to be good at communicating the scene. So, and that's it. I think this one is a good example because it gives you a good idea of what to expect, how the background is going to be seen, what part of background is going to be modeled more in detail. We had some situations where we had to build a whole model for an environment, and we were not told about the proper cameras that we would actually use to see that building. So we need to put detail everywhere, and it's exhausting. So just being able to do previs ahead of time like that saves us so much trouble. It's also very good because it gives you an idea of what kind of things that you're going to have to expect of the animation of the characters. And so for example, if you realize that the character has to do a specific movement, you might be able to plan ahead for that if it's more complicated. So you have modelers, and the whole idea with that is that you sculpt or you just use polygons to actually create shapes. For example, if you're going to have environments, you're going to have all those little details that you have to actually model with polygons. You need to have a good sense of scale. You need to also work with good topology. If you look at the model that you have just for the ponies, just getting the right triangles. It's also pretty tricky with modeling because the idea with those characters is that you need to put the polygons in a way where when you're going to bend them, the polygons are not going to freak out in all directions because those, well, they call it topology. This is the idea that you have models that actually bend in a specific angle and you don't want to put the polygons the wrong order, the wrong direction, and you want to actually put the polygons in a place where it's going to fold, because if it doesn't fold properly, the polygon is going to stretch really weird. And the whole reason why you want to do that is because, it's not the next one, is the one after. You're going to have surface artists, and the whole idea with that is that you don't just paint the color of the object, you're going to paint a lot of detail. For example, you have the specularity. For example, you have, not best example, but you're going to have some cups that are going to be a lot more reflective. you're going to have this table here that's a lot more matte. So you're going to have a different map that just has the roughness. And the whole idea with roughness is pure white is pure roughness, and pure black is pure specularity. And the whole idea is that you're going to have to paint some objects that have varying levels of that. For example, if you have brushed metal, some of it is going to be more rough, and some of it is going to be more shiny. So just being able to paint those details on the surface itself just helps a lot. You don't have to worry about making models with the detail on the geometry itself. You can actually do it in the texture. You're going to have normal maps, where the idea is that the whole idea of normal maps is that it's a fake sense of depth just generated by faking a sense of direction. So, for example, if you look at bricks on a wall and you just want to have something that looks like it has the pattern of bricks but doesn't have the height, it just fakes it by just pretending that the light is hitting it at a different angle, and the different angle is defined by a texture generated by the surface artist. So with that, you're also going to have to do, some studios do it differently, but with the surface artist, is going to do the UV unwrapping, and you can see a bit the UV unwrapping on the left. The whole idea is that you, if you think, for example, of sewing patterns, or for example, you're just wrapping a gift for Christmas. So you basically have to wrap a 2D texture on a 3D model, and you have to do that by cutting the seams of the 3D mesh on different plane and put the texture on top. There's some approaches where you actually unfold it in a way where it's the best stretch, like you don't have elements where the model is way too small and you end up with big pixels and texture, and it needs to be uniform, and then you do the texture for that. And you're going to have some approaches. That one's more for gaming with environments, where the whole idea is that you basically do a texture that's universal, and you basically do the UVs for that. So for example, if you want patterns of bricks or asphalt or any kind of material that tiles or that needs some properties, like you put that by just defining UVs correspondent to that. It's kind of weird, but once you have the hand of it, you get it. But the whole idea with that is that you need to make the texture that makes the model just look like something that's not just a gray model with polygon on it. Next one is going to be the rigger. The whole idea with that is that the rigging, like, you need to bend the characters to make them move. You can't just have a static character just stand like roll up like that. And the whole idea with rigging is you're going to have to do proper weight painting, because you're going to have, for example, if you look at the neck, just the idea that the neck stretches properly, because if you don't do it properly, you might have a part of the neck to just stay weirdly static. You're going to have some weird stretching. And the whole idea is that you need something that's also very flexible for the needs of the animators. So for example, if I have a scene where Izzy's neck just stretches in weird ways, like, you want to make sure that those models are going to be able to do that. Sometimes they're going to have the back and forth. That's why I mentioned earlier with the previous. If you have a scene where you point out that for example, for a scene where you have Izzy just turning her head, she's going to have to flip it like almost 180 degrees. And you point out, like, our rig needs to be able to do that. You need to be able to show, you need to be able to account for that when you're doing the model. Sometimes you're going to have models that are very defined fingers, not for Izzy, of course, but just being able to actually have fingers that actually properly bend without any weird issues is very important. It's tedious, but the work done, the work that they do with that is incredible. And of course, that 3D work, you're going to also have like DMP artists. And the whole idea is that sometimes you can have scenes where instead of 3D modeling the whole thing, it's much easier to just have a 2D picture that you can be seen only once. And sometimes they're going to do some more fancy things. For example, in this specific case, just to have a bit more perspective, they take the 2D cards and just bend it. And the whole idea with that is that since you have the sense of perspective added, even if it's subtle, it just helps a lot. And it's quite interesting because Izzy's house in the movie was a matte painting based on the 3D model, and that explains that one's more of a tangent, but that actually explains why If you compare what it looks like in the show in the movie, why it looks so different, because they just took the model and they painted over to actually make the look work. While for the TV show, like they don't have the budget to redo it for all the angles, and sometimes they need to have that seen from a lot of angles. So they had to just take the model and just texture it to look like what they had in the movie. And it's one of those realities when you have that kind of things. Like you have to make it work with the budget. You have to work because you have a limited budget that you're given, and you need to make it work to get the images for the project. You're going to have lighters, and the whole idea is that instead of just having 3D models that just stand and, for example, just a sunlight that's from inside, and you just work with the idea that the light bounces and everything, it looks like reality. Like, reality looks boring. Lots of movies that look real and sort of lighting, you look behind the scenes and they're going to have diffusers, they're going to have all sorts of lights just to make it look good. The best example I can give with those two pictures, if you look at Izzy and Sunny in the first one, the rim light that they have that should come from the sunlight that's bouncing in the window behind is way stronger than the actual light from the window. And the reason why is that the artist actually put a spotlight pointing at them to have an actually nice, crisp rim light on top of them, just to have something that looks better. And then you can see that they added some fill lights just to try to make it feel a bit more full and add a bit more depth, because if you're going to have some flat lighting, you can't really see the depth of the 3D models as well. And it's not as punchy, it's not as exciting. So just the idea of actually having a lighter that actually works to try to make it look good. Sometimes they're going to get color scripts to get a good idea of what to work with. They're going to get lots and lots of revisions to get the look intended. You also have the night scene, for example, where they have fire, but the fire that they have is probably not bright enough. And it flickers a lot, so you can't just put the fire source as a light and that's it. You're going to have some lights, for example, they actually added some spotlights pointing to some of the ponies. For example, you can see Zip and Pip, for example, that they just added a light just pointing at them just to get a nice rim light on them. And you couldn't get that just from that fire. And of course you have the light from the sky, because it's at night, but you want to actually see what's going on. So you actually had to have artists adding extra lights just to make it look like what it looked. And you're gonna think like, this is a lot of work, but it makes it so much better. You're gonna have, for example, that one only applies to the movie. It doesn't apply to the TV show because of the budget, but you have the FX and CFX artists. So the whole idea is that you have the hair and you have to simulate it to actually make it feel like hair. So for example, if I turn my head like this, like the hair actually follows, and you basically want to actually have to simulate it to actually get the proper movement. With the TV show, what they do instead is it's driven by bones, and then the animator can actually move those bones to actually make it wiggle. But with the movie, they actually had a lot more range to get the movement that they actually wanted. So, and sometimes you're gonna have characters, for example, there's lots of wind and you want to actually have the wind that looks a certain way. So you're gonna be asked, like, can you make the wind look a certain way, like more stylized way? And you're gonna have some formulas, add some turbulence, try to have some wiggle to try to make it feel like really good wind. And of course, you're going to have effects as well. For example, if you have a character just dropping a cup of water and you want the water to splash everywhere, the whole idea is that you need to simulate it, because it's basically the whole approach is basically just like estimating voxels, and voxels are basically like pixels in 3D. So you have you basically just have something that's basically you simulate a grid. And that grid just simulates the flow of water on that grid. It's really, really complex. The artists who work on that, I don't know what kind of magic they do, but just the idea of being able to do those simulations to get the look intended is incredible. And sometimes they're going to fake it. For example, if you have oceans with lots and lots of water, they're going to probably have a static plane that just goes up and down and then add some splashes on top. but the effects artists have to work on making those splashes work. It's quite a lot, but if you're really interested in science, like physics, and also very interested in animation, and you want to give something that looks stylized, it's quite interesting. You're gonna have compers. Think of it like Photoshop for video. You're gonna have lots of projects where the whole look is done in comp. The best example I can give of is Across the Spider-Verse, where a lot of it was basically just taking the 3D render and adding on top paint overs. And then you're going to be asked to combine those elements. For example, you're going to be asked, like, can you take the background plate we've already made, but try to warm it up in terms of color temperature? Can you increase the exposure? Can you lift the shadows? And you want to combine all those elements together to get a good picture that looks cohesive, looks interesting. Sometimes you're also going to be asked, like, can you patch this element? Because sometimes you're going to have a 3D render that looks mostly good, but instead of having to redo the whole thing that might take like days just to re-render, you're going to be asked, like, can you just put a patch on top of this element and just fix it? Which can really save the production. And unfortunately, the compers are at the end of production, so they have to make sure that they have to make sure everything works, and they have very thin deadlines. Compers are very important in the animation industry, but VFX is even more. A lot of effects are that people look at CG is basically just compositing work. For example, if you have to do keying, sometimes some studios are going to have a whole department just for keying alone. So it's really helpful. So if you really like Photoshop but you want to do it for video, it's really something I recommend. The IT department, because the whole thing is that you're going to have artists that are paid well. Lots and lots of artists that are expensive for the studios. And if you realize in the middle of it, like, our computers are broken and you need to keep things going, just being an IT specialist who knows how to fix those things is important. Sometimes it's going to be computers, sometimes it's going to be pipeline. So the whole idea of pipeline is that you have to ingest a lot of models. You have to process them to make sure that everybody has access to that. So being able to understand how to handle that kind of IT structure is really important. You're going to have production coordinators. It really depends from studio to studio. Some of them are going to write down notes, for example, during daily sessions. For example, you hear you're going to have an artist being told, like, you're going to need to take note of this element that you need to fix. So the coordinator is going to be able to know to be able to give the right person the right notes. So if you're really good at taking care of checklists, lots of meetings, lots of talking with people, which is terrible because I'm terrible at talking with people. So the one person who can tell, like, the introvert artist, like, can you do this? Can you send an email? Or maybe I'll send an email just telling people what needs to be done, just make sure that the production goes well. Because you don't want a production where nobody talks to each other and they realize too late that nothing has been done. I've had some issues, well, not in the industry, but I have had some issues in the fandom where the production was not, there was barely any communication between the artists, and the whole thing was kind of a mess at the end. So just the idea of people communicating in the studio like that is really important. And another job, that one's me, generalist, and the whole idea of generalist is think of it as a jack of all trades, but in the animation industry. So if you know a bit of modeling, a bit of surfacing, a bit of animation, and you know a bit of everything, it's really good to be able to tie up all the departments together, because you're going to look like, for example, if you realize that, like, some studios use that as QC artists, because since you know a bit of everything, you can actually point out, like, this is the thing that's wrong, let me fix it, and then you don't have to do too much back and forth. Some studios, what they have instead is that they have the whole environment department, for example, where it's just generalists, because they know how to model buildings, they know how to texture them, they might know how to do effects. It mostly applies to smaller studios, because with generalists, like, you just need a couple of artists and you can do a bit of everything, so they can work together. It really depends from studio to studio. And for example, in indie productions, Actually, I don't even talk much about indie productions, but the idea of having someone who talks, who knows a bit of everything, just helps a lot. So those are all the jobs that you might work on terrible movies. That's unfortunately that's a thing that happens. You're gonna see sometimes. A stinker, like a movie that you look and you wonder, why would anybody work on that? And unfortunately, that's the reality of it. Like you don't have the chance to, you don't have the chance to be too picky about the kind of projects to work. So you might work on something bad, but that's not a reason why you can't find something good out of it. Like you might say, like I worked on that thing. It turned out to be kind of a box office bomb, but it wasn't my fault. The part I did was good. I learned a lot because even on the bad movies, you might be able to find something good out of it that you've learned. I've had some projects where I learned so many things, and the project didn't turn out too well, and that's life. And you don't want to take it too personally because one of those things, like you don't want to go after artists saying, "Why did you work on that thing?" And you need to put food on your plates. So you can't really be picky, and the fact that you have something that you can actually show at the end is very important. So that's why I tell people, like don't give up if it feels like if it feels like the project you're working on is depressing. Like that happens. You might work on things that are different from movies and TV shows. Like sometimes you're gonna have studios that are gonna be asked, like, can you do an advertisement for I don't know, a video game? Or you're going to be asked, like, and that's the funniest thing. I was I was asked, like, can you do the little video that they show when they give you a little pattern to get the exit for planes? I don't remember which airline. I think it was WestJet, and we're basically showing just a little diagram with different planes, and. I was asked once to do an advertisement for a public transport organization. It was basically asked, like, can you stitch elements together from two plates in a way that feels nice? And I ran a couple of things out of it, and it felt really rewarding, even though it's just an advertisement for just one of those short advertisements you might see on TV and not really think about much. I've worked on some weird integration elements that I think, like, why would I do that? It's not really a movie. It's not that exciting, but I've worked on that. I learned a couple of things, so I'm really happy with that. Studio rivalry is kind of a joke. When I was working on Aquaman, we were talking about MCU movies all the time because we like movies. We don't really like picking sides, and I find it pretty funny because some of the studios that work on Aquaman also ended up working on Marvel movies as well. And the whole idea of trying to stick to a side, you don't have to. You have the right to like a lot of things. Like, don't try to pick fights at studio because you're wanting to side to your side. But, like, my coworkers know I like little ponies, and they're perfectly fine with that. It's one of those things. You have the right to like things. Artist rivalry also, because you're going to work at a studio and you need to show that you're the best. And one of the things that you don't want to just, for example, you're going to have an artist who have to take your shot because, I don't know, maybe you were sick that day or there's a deadline and you need to take your shot and do a couple minor adjustments. Like, don't take it personally. Like, it has just to be, you need to deliver as a studio, not just a single artist. So you might have to say, like, this part I might not have fixed myself because I couldn't. But you have the final result of a project that you can actually show, like, because it's a collaborative project, and sometimes you might make a mistake that another artist might spot. So trying to turn it into rivalry between artists would be just destructive for everybody else. And I'm thinking, like, for example, if you're having a shot where, for example, you're trying to take too many shots to work on at once just because you think, like, I can be the fastest, and then you're basically taking jobs away from other artists, even though you're not going to be able to do the best job at those because you're rushing them, and then you're going to have artists who basically have nothing to do because you've taken everything from them. So it's basically destructive for both. And of course, it's your coworkers and your friends. You don't want to make enemies out of your coworkers. So it's good to just have to feel like you're working together as a team to get a project made. And I think that's very valuable because you don't want to alienate, and you don't want people to think of you as one person who's too proud of his work and is going to fight over everything. Talking about competition, that's not much of an issue anymore because you have because back in the days you had non-compete clauses where they're going to basically tell you like, if you work for us, you're not going to be able to work for like next 3 months for a different studio that does the same kind of things. So the whole idea is that you need to check your contract because you're going to have some of those things. So for example, because you might end up like losing your job and you're basically told like, yeah, you can't really work in the studio for the next, next 6 months just because of that clause. So make sure to really read your work contract just to make sure that nothing goes wrong. And you got a question? Because what a coincidence.
So when it comes to the like when they say it will soon up like 3 months or so, do they at least generally guarantee 3 months of work during that time?
Usually they do. They might be a bit sneaky. I haven't really had that situation where they had that kind of limited time, but I've seen some cases where sometimes it's just a project just folds because something external just didn't work right. But the main thing is mostly just like you need to be wary about the contract, and you might have to negotiate by saying like, I can't go with that because, for example, if you're being told like you can't, sometimes you're gonna have some contracts that are gonna say like you can't in like your city, and you might have to move, and you can just point out like there's no other job anywhere, or this is just unreasonable. It's rare to happen, but I really recommend people just read the contract, just make sure not to find out at the last minute and have to file for unemployment or just have to find a job that's completely different field just because they didn't know about that. So just being really wary about that. Do I have an... Oh, I don't have a lot of time left. Can we do speed questions? Yeah?
Do you have anyone that like fights for you on your behalf as an artist?
Fights for me on my behalf?
Yeah, I mean, are you more? Maybe I missed it I did step out. But is there anyone that's like, are you more like a freelancer, or are you more union, or what?
Oh, there's no union, unfortunately. With animation, they're still working on that. It's mostly just contract based for studios. So, and I did try for once at one point to work with independent projects, and one of the reasons why I recommend to be careful with independent projects is some of them just fail. We worked on one that turned out to just not go anywhere. I was really proud of the work I was doing, but it just turned out that we had some problems. One of the actors just dropped out. We shot during COVID. And because of that, we had some people, it took a lot of time. Some people were becoming too old. And I was thinking, this was one of the reasons why I recommend to be careful with kind of an independent project. You still need to know if some things are going to go wrong. But it's also the same with contract-based stuff. You're going to have a contract, you're going to be told, you're going to work on this project until March. And then you're going to have to think, because sometimes you're going to be told, couple of months before, we have a new project, so we're going to extend you, and then they're going to extend you, but you have to be to consider they might tell you well, yeah, we don't have anything else, so goodbye. That's actually what happened with my second job. I was just told, yeah, there's because actually it's even funnier. There was another project that was open, but they had less people working on that one, and they didn't have any spot for me, so I felt a bit heartbroken, but then I realized that's life. That's one of those things where you have to just admit that, you have to admit that things don't always line up. So,
which is why it's so important, to read about the contract, about the non-compete, because you don't know if you're coming in for that next position, they're not going to carry you over. You need to know that you have something to back you up.
Yeah. I think that's mostly it. Any other question? I think that's it. Actually, let me check. There's another panel I'm gonna do in a couple. Actually, when is it? 45 minutes? Really?
I started at 45.
Yeah, it's yeah, 42 minutes. It's called Animation Across the MLP Fandom. It's going to be in main hall. I'm going to have a preview of Project Undercloud Remake. It's a preview of a preview because of the full preview is going to be as a separate panel. But I'm going to be showing that. I'm going to be actually talking about the actual animation process because I feel like those panels are done backwards. I was hoping that this one would happen after. Because talking about the industry is nice, but it's from the pony fandom to the industry, but that's life. But if you want to learn a bit how to do 2D or 3D animation or both, I'm really excited to just show some of the work. So if you're really excited for that, I really welcome you there. And I'm gonna have a little personal preview for Project Undercloud Remake that the project is not gonna release on YouTube in it's going to take like at least 2 months. So you're going to have a very early preview with lots of completed animation. So, and on your side, do you have anything you want to talk about?
I have 11 events this weekend.
You're going to suffer.
I lost my mind.
Already?
Yes.
11 events.
I've also already been like frisked by stopped and frisked by Dayton police yesterday. So they made me stand out in the sun for an hour. So Red Lobster wants to send me a cease and desist now.
Oh, wait, they did that at the...
They did that outside my hotel.
Oh.
I was like, I'm in this hotel. What's wrong with you?
That's yeah. That's not fun.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah. Wait, is that why you got the sunburn?
Mm-hmm.
Oh god. I was thinking, did you just go outside the lot?
Oh no, I was walking in the shade. You did great, by the way.
Thanks.
Despite the fact that the room is...
Yeah, no, I was
I walked in here and I'm like, I'm in a lab coat. This is freezing.
yeah.